When we discuss the difference between theft, robbery, and burglary, we look at the dollar amount versus actions taken. So, robbery and burglary, the dollar amount is irrelevant, right? We're looking at the actions of the accused rather than the actual dollar amount. Even a dollar for a robbery case can still be a robbery, be C felony versus theft, which would be a misdemeanor in that circumstance. Burglary doesn't even require a dollar amount. When we look at theft, under 1,000 is a misdemeanor. E felony for 1,000 to 2,500, D felony 2,500 to 10,000, 10 to 60 goes to a C, 60 to 250 a B felony, and then an A felony above that. So we're looking at just depriving someone of their money, their property that is valued at a certain dollar amount. Robbery, on the other hand, requires a taking from the person through either violence or fear. So we think of theft, the easiest way is a shoplifting. Someone goes to a store, they take something off the rack, leaves the store with it, or attempts to leave the store with it. Very simple. It's theft, it's shoplifting. Robbery requires more, right? It requires an actual taking from the person, taking it from their hand that they're in actual possession of, or constructive possession. So it's near them, it's in their immediate control. They have the intent to exercise dominion and control over that item, and it's taken from them. It's a C felony, and then it becomes more serious as an aggravated robbery to a B felony if it's used with a deadly weapon. It doesn't even require a deadly weapon, just something that even looks like a deadly weapon, right? So
yeah, anything someone could reasonably believe to be a deadly weapon. I think we talked earlier about a water gun that's painted black that from me to you could very well appear to be something like a Glock or some sort of pistol. I like to think of robbery just like theft plus violence and fear or fear. So it could be anything like a gun, like we talked about. It can be something like a strong arm robbery where you have no weapon, but you're using force to forcibly take something from someone, whether it be their purse or wallet or something like that. That could elevate that theft, even if there's $1 in that wallet or purse, to that felony robbery.
Right, absolutely. And then if a serious bodily injury occurs during the act, it could become an especially aggravated robbery, go up to an A felony. So really, we're focused on the actions, what happened, what weapon was used, or what display does someone believe is a deadly weapon. But also, did they fear it, right? And so there's times when we talk about aggravated assaults, but also robbery, where we talk about display of a weapon may have been used. But did the person fear it, and is that what led to the taking from the person? So everything needs to connect, and we look at, is there a proximate cause, or what is but for the weapon being used or displayed, would this not have occurred, is really what we're looking at. And so sometimes there's temporal gaps as well. And so we look at the time component, and did that become a factor in whether the taking occurred? Because at the end of the day, the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the taking occurred because of the display of that weapon, deadly weapon, or the fear that was caused. And then robbery differs from burglary in a pretty significant way as well, right? So
exactly.
Robbery, we talk about taking from a person, as you mentioned, violence or deadly weapon or fear. Sorry. Burglary is a lot different than that. So let's talk about burglary next.
Yeah, so burglary it kind of builds on the two, but it's also different in a lot of ways. So burglary is a situation in which someone enters a place when they enter, that they have an intent to commit a felony, to commit an assault, or a theft. That has to be their intent when they enter it. So when we think about that, one of the things we come across a lot in a defense that we talk with DAs and prosecutors about is that they did not have that intent when they entered the place. So you walk in Krispy Kreme to buy some donuts, and then when you get in there, you decide to grab the donuts off the counter and leave. You didn't walk in there with an intent to commit a theft. You walked in there with intent to buy the donuts, but changed your mind once you got in there. That is not going to classify as that intent when you enter to make that a burglary, as opposed to just a shoplifting or a theft, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and I think the most common example is really when it comes to assault or serious felonies. I've had a number of cases I've gotten dismissed at hearings. I've discussed with prosecutors where someone is in a verbal altercation. I think of a few times when there are text message exchanges between two individuals. The person goes to the person's house, enters without consent to enter into their habitation, their residence, but the door is unlocked or the garage is open, so they enter the premises, right? Expecting to just continue that verbal altercation they were having over the phone, and the person blocked them or whatever it might be. Well, then they enter, that verbal altercation becomes physical. It ends up being charged as a burglary in many instances I've had. But the argument with the prosecutor and when I got the case dismissed in front of a judge is, hey, when they entered the premises, they were not thinking they were going to punch this person in the face or they were going to display this deadly weapon or whatever it might be. When they entered, they just wanted to have a conversation. Things got ugly from there, but just because things get ugly after the fact does not help show a burglary. Of course, the state may show text messages or some type of evidence showing you intended to commit that assault when you entered. But again, that's the state's job to prove. And there's plenty of defenses if they cannot prove it. Then something like a burglary, which could be anywhere from a D, C, or B felony, depending on the circumstances, can drop down to something like a simple assault misdemeanor or a theft misdemeanor, right?
Yeah, and to build on that, so Brandon talked about the D, C, and B felony for the burglary. So we think about burglary, so the lowest level is going to be just a place, a business, or any sort of place that's not a house. So we get into the C when we enter some sort of habitation and commit or enter with the intent to commit that felony, the theft, or the assault. And then we can get into an especially aggravated burglary if that results in some sort of serious bodily injury inside that house.
Yeah, and so when we talk about like the Krispy Kreme example, for example, right? Just entering Krispy Kreme and stealing is shoplifting, theft, because you have the consent or the public has the consent to enter a Krispy Kreme. But the most famous case that actually came out of Knox County a few years back is how, if you commit a theft from Krispy Kreme, for example, they give you a no trespass sign. You're not allowed to enter the premises. Now, the next time you go there and commit a theft, you're entering the premises without the effective consent of Krispy Kreme. That is how a simple theft could then become that burglary, is the second you don't have consent. And so even when we talk about entering a habitation, same thing. If you think that you have consent, or we have an argument that you every single day it's your boyfriend and you have a key to the house and they're saying that you didn't have the consent to be there that day. Well, we may have an argument that you having a key gives you that consent to enter whenever you want. So really looking at every element of the offense, looking at the facts and the evidence the state has to try to figure out a way to prove whatever element it is the state can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt. That is what we're going to attack. We're going to show the jury, we're going to show a judge or show a prosecutor to try to get the best outcome we possibly can, avoid the more serious felony, either avoid the a misdemeanor potentially as well, but at least avoid that most serious charge. Because sometimes if a theft occurred, There's nothing we can do about that in some cases. But if that theft is elevated to a burglary or a robbery, there are things we can do to avoid those more serious felonies, avoid the prison time, avoid the mandatory no parole eligibility, things like that. So we're going to do everything we can to try to make that happen.